Hello everyone, good morning or good afternoon depending on where you're joining us from today. Welcome to this Audit and Assurance in Focus webinar support for the December 2024 exams. My name's Isabel and I work as an Education Community Manager at ACCA. And as the title of this webinar suggests, it's Step Inside the Mind of the Marker. Our session today is designed to support you with the insights from the latest Read the Mind of the Audit and Assurance Marker. We have expert tutor Erin Morton, who's joined us to help you with your upcoming exam preparation. We're going to be providing insights from the article, take you through technical examples, and sharing practical advice for tackling your December exams. Erin's also going to talk about the strategies which you can adopt to avoid common pitfalls and improve your exam performance. And there'll also be a chance at the end for some live Q&A. Before I hand over to Erin, I just need to cover a few housekeeping items very quickly though. So at the bottom of your screen, you've got a number of buttons that you can use during this webinar. There is a help icon. That one will provide you with resources and information to help you resolve any technical issues you might experience. You'll also see icons for both the slides and media player. Make sure you've got both of those open during the webinar. And you can also access an attendee chat function so that you can chat with your fellow webinar attendees. Just bear in mind that that's a public forum, so we do encourage you not to share personal details in the attendee chat. You've got a resources list, and that's the icon that looks a bit like a file symbol. If you click on this, you'll be able to access the resources that are relevant to today's webinar, including the direct links. Do try rearranging the screen to suit you and resize the windows if you need to. If at any point you can't hear what we're saying or you can't see any visuals, please try refreshing your browser first, as that usually helps. Registering for this webinar means you're going to be sent an email in the next 24 hours with details of how you can watch it again. So don't worry if you miss something or if you have technical issues, you will be able to watch this again on demand. I'm going to hand over to Erin at the moment, and I will be back with you at the end of the session. Just a note before I go, if you want to ask ACCA a question, then please post them in the Q&A section. But we get a lot of questions, so please note we can't guarantee to respond to everyone directly, either verbally or via the inbox. But we really hope that the questions we cover and share will be helpful to everyone. So that's enough from me. I am now going to hand over to our expert tutor, Erin. Over to you, Erin.
Thanks, Isabel. Hi, everyone. Okay, so nice little webinar that we have this afternoon to kickstart us to get ready for the last few days leading up to our audit and assurance exam. Now, the things that we're going to cover, the predominant reason why we're here is to look at the key insights from the Read the Mind of the Marker for audit and assurance. So we're going to look at what they're trained to look for, how marks are awarded, common reasons for losing marks, so that we can try and pick up some last minute tips and ideas of things that you can not only use on your exam day, but things that you can start thinking about and addressing now in your preparation and in your revision time leading up to the exam. We'll have a little look at the technical examples that were given in the article, and I'll also be providing some practical advice on how to enhance your preparations as well. As Isabel said, there is going to be a live Q&A, so those questions we'll be picking out from the Q&A box, so do make sure that you post them in there. Now, a little bit about me. I am Erin Morton. I have been teaching students for 21 years now, helping ACCA students pass their exams amongst other professional bodies. I'm also an ex-auditor, so I used to work at Mazars. I was there for about 8 years before I went into training and tutoring and teaching. I did my AAT, and I also did my ACCA qualification as well. So I've been in your shoes, and I definitely know how it feels and how much pressure there is leading up to these exams. I'm also an examiner for another professional body, and I have been trusted as one of the ACCA expert tutors. So I help with lots of resources like this and help provide information and help for you guys in preparation for your exams. So we're going to look at this kind of revamped, pretty article that's been created by ACCA. But before we do that, I want to ask a question. Do you use ACCA articles as part of your preparation? So there is a poll up on the screen now if you want to go ahead and answer. So do you use yes, you use them, no, or just sometimes, depending on the situation? If you can add your answer, that would be great. I'll give you a little bit of time to submit that. There's a few coming in now. Okay, we're over halfway of all of you submitting, so just a few more seconds so that we can get on to some of the technical information to help you for your exam. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Okay, that's it. Let's see what the answer is. So, oh, wow. What a split. I don't think that's ever happened. So pretty much an even split across the 3 answers there. So a real mixed bag as to whether you are using these articles in preparation for your exam. I think what's historically been seen by candidates getting ready for ACCA exams is that they become very important at the strategic professional stage. However, they are incredibly important at this stage, in particular for the exams that are the most trickiest to get through. So we know that audit and assurance has a low pass rate. We know that it has historically been a big issue for lots and lots of candidates trying to get through and understand how to actually get through this exam, and often there's multiple attempts to get through it. So by not just using your textbook to get ready for the audit and assurance exam, but to actually use holistically a whole range of different resources to get you ready, understanding the actual syllabus itself, understanding how to prepare for the exam. A lot of these articles are very, very useful, and there are lots of resources on the ACCA website for audit and assurance, which you can take a look at. And as Isabel mentioned, we have got some links for you there. So what we have is this particular article. So this is the Read the Mind of the AA marker. It has had a bit of a rebrand, so we've got a new look and it's much more interactive. So as I've found when I've been preparing and looking for it, it's actually really user friendly, and it's actually quite fun. It's almost a bit of a quiz style where you can have a think about what the candidate has answered, and then you can then look at what the examiner or the marker is saying should have been answered. What it does is it focuses on 2 questions. So we've got this article, but we're focusing on 2 practice questions, which were Blackberry and Gooseberry, which were past exam questions. Blackberry is an audit risk and response question, and Gooseberry is an audit procedures question. They haven't been chosen randomly. They've been chosen because they are the most difficult questions to answer. So therefore, getting as much feedback as possible for you guys is really, really important. We have 2 student answers for both of those questions. And so what the marker does is it then takes you through those answers and tells you what marks they gave them for that particular area, and also why as well, which I think is a brilliant resource because it's giving us a real insight into the reasons why they're not giving full marks, and why they're giving no marks sometimes, which is sometimes a little bit surprising. So there's lots and lots of feedback, and something definitely well worth reviewing if you haven't looked at it already. One of the general things that we need to understand, though, is about our marker and what it is that they're actually looking for. So the key insights we get from looking at this article and understanding what our markers have to do is that our marker is methodical. They're specific. They are consistent, and they are also deliberate in the marks that they award. There is a very fine detail in terms of how they are awarding those marks. And what I take from that is that is what their expectations of you is as well. They are expecting you to be methodical in your answers and keeping a rhythm throughout the exam and making sure that you're having a go at every single part of the exam, being consistent with your time as well. So making sure that you are allocating fair time across the board, being very specific with your answers. And that's where most students will fall down, is that you're on the right tracks, but you're not necessarily writing exactly what they need to give you those full marks. And then also being deliberate, so stating key facts that you know, which is what the marker's looking for, so that they can then award you. They want to help you. And this article, if anything, highlights that even more, because they're giving you that insight now so that then they can get you ready for this exam. So what your market is trained for, they are looking for clear communication in your answers. They're not expecting you, which is what I see a lot with a lot of student answers as well, is I know a lot of technical words, I'm going to throw them all into a sentence, and that's going to make me look like I understand the syllabus. They're not looking for that at all. What they're looking for is, do you actually understand the syllabus? So you don't have to always use those technical words, as long as you are communicating clearly your understanding. They also are looking for you understanding the requirement and answering the whole question, which is one of the other key problems that's been highlighted. So students, again, will be on the right tracks, but won't quite answer everything, and therefore are missing out on valuable marks. The scenario, which is what happens in all of our questions pretty much. We've got, lots of scenarios in section A and section B with very few pure knowledge questions. Understand this scenario is critical to answering the bulk of questions in your audit and assurance exam. So you have to be able to understand the scenario and apply it to the area of the syllabus that you are aware of, that you're being asked about, in order to score well. And again, lots of problems that we see with students is ignoring the scenario, ignoring key content, and therefore missing out on valuable points. And they're also looking for specific conclusions as well. So, for example, audit risk, stating the impact that that risk has on the financial statements, being very specific, not just saying, oh, the profit and loss will be affected, actually saying what balance could be affected. And if it's clear, could it be overstated or could it be understated? So they're looking for those specific conclusions. And if you don't give them, they can't give you the marks. Marks are awarded fairly and consistently, despite what everyone says. So do be aware that there is, trained markers that are running through these scripts, and they are running through all of these individual questions in batches, and they're making sure they're looking for those keywords so that somebody who has applied their knowledge consistently, is using the scenario, is going to be rewarded really, really well from them. Common reasons for losing marks in the AA exam? Well, not being specific enough in your answer, which is what I just picked up on, including audit risk questions, not giving enough detail. Not generating enough points as well, which often comes down to time management. We always have a problem with running out of time in the exam and maybe rushing certain questions. And so therefore you might not necessarily have been able to generate enough points. But remember, with question practice and enough preparation between now and the exam, you will speed up that process and hopefully get a lot more in. Not using the scenario enough or at all, and again, as we said, will miss your marks, and not allocating your time in the exam fairly. Time management, we know, is tough. It will get tougher as we move into strategic professional stages. So we do need to make sure that we are practicing, thinking about how much time to allocate to each question, and making sure that you are forcing yourself to move on as well. So there was some technical examples from this article. The first one, as I said, was BlackBerry. So BlackBerry was looking at our audit risk and planning question. Now, what the article did was focus on just the audit risk and responses. So highlighted there, you can see the 16 marks. It asked us to describe 8 audit risks and explain the auditor's response to each risk in planning the audit of BlackBerry. It is a common requirement. This is something that we will see come up in every single exam. So again, the examiner has expressed that it will be asking for somewhere between 6 and 8 audit risks. So you're either looking at a 12, 14 or 16 mark question. So it's a huge chunk of marks for your exam, isn't it? And so therefore it's really important that we make sure that we are prepared and can score really well in this question, which is fairly straightforward to do as long as you know what you're looking for. You need to make sure that you plan your time, and that you only give the required number of risks, coming straight from the marker's mouth. They have said if it is an 8, asking for 8 audit risks, give 8 audit risks. Don't start churning out 10, 11, 12, or picking things out of thin air or just hoping that they might be relevant. So just sticking to the facts and sticking to the scenario information is key. This will also continue to be important in the exam as well. So this is not going away. Audit risk is going to stay. So preparation for your exam for this time round, again, is critical. And question practice is needed for this topic. It's really practical. Remember, audit risk is something that the auditors look at the planning stage. They sit there at the beginning of the process with the client and looking at the client's records, and what they're trying to decide is what kind of client they've got. Have they got a dodgy client, a client that's a bit tricky, there's been a few problems, things that might cause them issues that are going to cause them headaches, or ultimately could cause them to issue the wrong audit opinion? Or have they got a quite nice, safe client that's well behaved, fairly consistent, no major issues, and maybe their industry that they work in is fairly safe as well? So they're trying to gauge what type of client they've got. And so therefore they're looking at all of the information about the client. And this exam question simulates that. You're looking at a client, you're looking at all of the key information that they've put together so far. And what they want you to do is, can you find the key audit risks out of everything that we've told you? And then can you tell me why they're actually audit risks? The other thing to note is the mark scheme for this. So there are up to 2 marks awarded for each audit risk and response. Half a mark will be awarded to identify the audit risk. So literally copying from the scenario and putting it into your answer area in the exam will give you half a mark, as long as it's a relevant audit risk. The other half a mark will then be awarded to explain why it's an audit risk. And this is where we go back to what I said about being very specific about your key answers. So does it affect an area of the financial statements? What area? Does it affect a balance? Does it mean it will go up? Does it mean it will go down? You do need to make sure that you give that specific information to be awarded that work. And then 1 mark will be awarded for an appropriate auditor's response. Our auditor's response is basically what the auditor will now do based on the fact that they've got this problem. So, how to get the audit risk marks? Explaining the audit risk is one of the things that students fall down on the most. So for half a mark, you would be able to get half a mark if you stated the assertion that's being affected. So does it affect completeness, valuation, cutoff? So mentioning something like that, showing that key technical information could get you that half a mark. Or you could explain whether the amounts are being over, under, or misstated. Or you could also use your explanation to demonstrate the effect on the type of risk. So does it affect inherent control or detection risk? So there's lots of options in terms of how you can get your explanation down. But just remember that if you are talking about a balance or an area being over, under, or misstated, if you say misstated, you will only get half a mark if it's clear that the risk would lead to over or understatement. So if it means that you're sitting on the fence going, oh, I'm not sure which way round this goes, but it goes in one direction, then you are going to miss out on that mark. So you do need to stop sitting on the fence and actually being more deliberate about your answers and stating whether they're over or under. And then every now and then we get a nice one where misstated is just about enough. The other thing is the audit response, which is another area where students really struggle to be able to get those full marks. So it's the audit approach that the team will take. It doesn't have to be a detailed audit procedure. So we're not testing you on substantive audit procedures here. We're testing that on another question in section B. What they're actually getting you to do is think about the type of audit work. So you don't have to write it out as a specific procedure. It could be a couple of ideas of areas in relation to the audit process. The detail is needed though. So for example, you can say things like you're going to discuss with management, but you need to say what you're going to say. You can't just say discuss with management, otherwise you won't get the marks. So again, you need to be very deliberate and you need to be specific. And it must relate to the risk identified in the scenario. So you need to make sure that when you are typing out your audit responses, they do link to what it is that you've identified in the first place. So in this question, we're going to focus on candidate 1 and just look at an extract of some of the answers that were given so that we can think about the technical information that's needed. We're going to look at the first 3 responses of candidate 1. And obviously you have the article that then you can look at all of the other responses and the other candidate as well afterwards. So candidate 1 was answering this question on audit risk. They were looking for 8, and their first audit risk was this one. They told us that inventory cost is made up of the purchase price of raw materials and cost of conversion, including labour, production and general overheads. Under IAS 2, inventory should be measured at the lower of cost and net realisable value. And then their response was that inventory costs should only include the cost of raw materials. The auditor should obtain a breakdown and recalculate inventory in compliance with IAS 2. So we need to think about how many marks they were awarded. And this article is great because it tells us how many they awarded them. So for this one, they only awarded half a mark. So with feedback, they've told us why. They've told us that they've awarded it for identifying that there is a risk associated with inventory. If we look at that here, the inventory cost is made up of the purchase price of raw materials, cost of conversion, including labour, production and general overheads. They've given us half a mark for that, but they haven't given you half a mark for the explanation. They state that they haven't given that because there's no indication of the effect on the financial statements. So they've mentioned under IAS 2 what the rule is, but they haven't said the impact on the financial statements. So they haven't gone far enough to get that half a mark. The same with the explanation as well. It needs to state, what they've mentioned, if we just go back and have a quick look at it, they've said that inventory costs should only include the cost of raw materials. That's not true. Also, they then say that the auditor should obtain a breakdown and recalculate inventory in compliance with IAS 2. Well, that should have already been done by the client. So again, not really a relevant procedure. That's something that we would expect the auditors to do in response to this issue. What we'd want to do is see whether they have included costs that shouldn't have been included under the actual standard. So as it mentions in here, it says how inventory should be valued is not an auditor's response, and to recalculate inventory correctly is management's responsibility. So harsh but true, but looks like actually quite a nice answer, but only awarded half a mark. The next one was about inventory. Now, in this one, it told us in the scenario, it mentioned that they had multiple warehouses. They had different areas where they held inventory. And it said that it's impossible for the auditor to attend all of the inventory counts. In addition, the cost of travel is not worth the benefits. Well, straight away, it's not impossible for the audit team to attend all of inventory counts. And it's often worth the benefits if it means that we're going to identify material misstatements. So even that statement on its own seems to be a little bit unusual and not one that I would expect to be getting a mark for. The auditor's response says that it should attend inventory counts in warehouse that has a history of having its inventory misstated, or the warehouse with the most material amount of inventory. Again, focusing just on the most material amounts would potentially give us would highlight a potential issue, because it could be that you're missing out on looking at other areas where there could still be mistakes that could add up to material misstatements. But the other issue we had with this is that in this scenario for this client, it wasn't about the 3 locations. It was about something else. So they didn't award any marks for this audit risk because, as it mentions here, the issue is that the counts will take place after the year-end date. They'd told us that they were going to count, I think, a couple of days after the year-end, and that was the reason why there would be an audit risk. So this was a bit of a red herring in the scenario, really, but actually by reading further, which was straight after this, they would have identified and picked up on that as the real answer. However, they went down this more general route, which wasn't relevant at all. So no marks for that one. And then the third one, I know, I've seen shocked faces. However, this is what we're talking about, making sure that you read the scenario. Okay, so before I talk about this one, this is what we're trying to demonstrate for you. It's really important to make sure that you are reading that scenario and looking for the key audit risks. And in this situation, having three different locations is fine, as long as you make sure you plan it effectively. It's not something that there's a bigger issue, which is the fact that they were then going to count 2 days later. So therefore, we've got no marks for that one. So this other audit risk that we had, which has been highlighted as well, is that the purchase of the patent. The 1.1 million has been expensed in the current year statement of profit and loss. The classification was not properly done. The expense was overstatement and the patent or the intangible asset was understated. The response is that they should assess whether the criteria for IS 38 has been met and auditors may need to rely on an expert. So, how many marks would we give for this one? Well, the marker has given us some marks, but I want to hear from you. I want to get your input. So we're going to have a poll and we're going to decide how many marks should be awarded for this risk. So purchasing the patent, the expense was overstatement, and that they should assess whether the criteria of IS 38 have been met and maybe rely on an expert. So would you give half a mark, 1 mark, or 1.5 marks for this? See if the poll's working. Ooh. I don't think the poll's there, so I'm having a
poll is coming up,
it's
but
fine.
People are putting answers in the attendee chat.
I've jumped down to the attendee chat because I can see lots and lots of answers, and we're getting a whole mixed bag, as I would expect. But there's lots of 1 marks coming through as the general consensus. I'm seeing yes. Okay, so quite a few responses so far. Okay, yeah, so predominantly 1 mark. So let's see what the marker gave. They gave 1 mark. So they gave a mark for awarding, for identifying the risk and correctly stating its effect on the financial statements. So the left-hand side of that answer was the whole mark awarded. So half a mark for identifying, half a mark for explaining. However, the response, the auditor's response, they didn't give any marks for, because it's not linked to the risk, as it doesn't address the fact that the cost of the patent has been expensed rather than being recognised as an intangible asset. Also, the thing that worried me was that we were expecting an expert to come in and help assess that intangible asset. As auditors, we're the accountants, aren't we? And so therefore we are the experts on accounting standards and whether they are being followed correctly. So bringing in further people kind of supersedes the need for having the auditors in the first place. So in this situation, when we're looking at treatment of accounting standards, we would expect the auditor to be able to deal with that one on their own. So yes, 1 mark for the identification and explanation, no marks for the audit response. Well done. Okay, so as you can see, that audit risk question, it's really interesting to see what the marker thought of those answers, and it's probably well timed right now that you're looking at this so that you can start thinking about how you're going to fine tune your answers as well. This next question was gooseberry. So in question 2, the other question that was being reviewed in the article was looking at substantive audit procedures. So there was 3 different elements, A, B, and C, all of them asking for substantive audit procedures. First of all, for part A was looking for research and development. Part B was looking for procedures relating to property, plant and equipment. And then part C was looking at the director's bonuses. So there was 5 marks for each of those. Again, it's a really common requirement. So we will always see substantive audit procedures turn up in section B of your exam. You will, however, see different areas of the financial statements. So you might see it from areas of the statement of profit and loss, statement of the financial position. So there is going to be a little bit of differentiation in relation to that. You do need to address the specifics of the question. So you need to make sure that you're looking at the question and whether they are targeting a specific assertion or whether they are just asking for you to answer procedures based on that balance on its own in general. You also really need the scenario as well. So you need to make sure that you are reviewing that scenario to tailor the answer to the client. And it's really easy not to answer the question set, as I've seen students answer many, many times and give brilliant audit procedures, but just not for the answer that's been asked. So do make sure that you are reading those requirements, really clearly and making sure that you are targeting the question that's been set. The other thing to note about these is the mark scheme. So it's 1 mark for each well-described audit procedure. For it to be well described, you need to make sure that you have an action. So you need to make sure, what is it the auditor's doing? Are they inspecting? Are they recalculating? Are they confirming? So using those key verbs to help with that. You also need a source. So what is it that they're actually looking at? Are they reviewing the inventory count records? Are they inspecting invoices? Are they comparing them to the sales ledger? So you need to be specific about the areas of the accounting system that you're auditing and where it is that you're looking, and also why, which is the reason. So you need to also explain why you're doing that. So that can be using an assertion, but it can also be in your own words, just explaining why you would do that work. Procedures that don't relate to the scenario will get 0 marks. So even though you look at that question, you go, okay, looking for 5 marks on sales, and then you start doing lots of rote learnt procedures that you've learned in relation to sales, if they don't make sense to the client you've been given in the scenario, you won't get the marks. So you do need to make sure that you are reviewing the scenario information and that it makes sense with what's going on with your particular client that you're reviewing. So for this one, I'm just going to look at the research and development area. So there was research and development information in the scenario itself for this question. So I've just highlighted that for you just so we can see the key points that were given. So Gooseberry spent $1.9 million in the current year developing 9 new health and beauty products, all of which are at different stages of development. Once they meet the recognition criteria, they then include costs incurred with intangible assets. Once production commences, the intangible assets are amortized on a straight line basis over 3 years. So we've got different development stages, we've got amortization happening, but it's straight line over 3 years. And management believes that this amortization policy is a reasonable approximation of the asset's useful life, as in the industry, there is a constant demand for innovative new products. So writing off over 3 years potentially works with these because we're looking at health and beauty products. So that's the information that we were given in the scenario. The question was then asking for audit procedures. So we had 5 marks and therefore we were expecting to produce 5 audit procedures. So they gave us, this candidate gave us 5. First one was to obtain a list of research and development expenditure and costs to ensure accuracy. The next one was to agree the total to the general ledger. We then were told that we should review the cash flow forecast to confirm that there's enough finance available to complete development projects. There was inspecting board minutes as well and recalculating the amortization. So some nice ideas, but just whether we have, or the candidate has written enough in respect of the detail so that we can give the full mark. So for the first one, the marker gave half a mark. So to obtain a list of research and development expenditure and cast it to ensure accuracy. The problem we have with this is it's true, it's something we should do. We should get a breakdown of research and development and we should add it up, but it isn't telling us what we're going to agree that total to. So the clear message from the markers is, yes, you should add things up, but you also need to tell us what you're then going to do with it. So if you've got a total, which is the total of the research and development expenditure, you want to agree that to the balance in the ledger or the trial balance. If they had added that extra little bit of detail, it would have been a whole mark. The next one, so looking at the second one, agreeing the total to the general ledger to ensure completeness. Again, half a mark, it's too brief. So yes, you agree to the general ledger, but it's not clear where the total has been agreed to. So what I've often done, where I've seen students do this time and time again, and when I've been marking, is if I'm giving feedback leading up to the exam, I'm pretty much saying those two together, if you made them a little bit more concise but lump them together, that's a whole procedure. Okay, so really you've tried to split out 2 separate things, but they are actually one procedure on their own. The third one was to review the cash flow forecast to confirm that enough finance is available to complete the developments. So would we give a mark for that? Absolutely, yes. Because if they've got these development projects and they're saying that they are viable projects and therefore they should be included as an intangible asset, we want to make sure that they have got the money for them. Otherwise, that would stop them being a viable project. So a good practical application of one of the key facts that has come from IS 38. The fourth one was looking at board minutes. It looked at board minutes for discussions about issues in the development stage and sales of launches relating to products. So what we're trying to look for here is, have there been any problems, any things that might delay the production happening or delay the launch of a product, which could then potentially mean that they shouldn't be capitalized. And so again, a really nice practical idea and 1 mark given, because they haven't just said inspect board minutes, they've told us why they're going to inspect those board minutes as well. And then the last one was looking at recalculating amortization on the development cost and then compare that with the previous year. Now, this one, if just the way it was worded, I would normally sit there as a marker. This would be one that I'd sit for a while and go, I don't know whether I can give you a whole mark or a half mark. I need to think, because there's a bit of a dilemma, because you've almost there. You're so close to giving the full amount of information, but just missing some key elements. And so as a result, it was a half a mark awarded. Credit's been given, as it mentions, but the point lacks sufficient detail. And really what we're looking at is the fact that they're saying that they're going to recalculate amortization and then compare that to the previous year. But as we saw, again, if I can scroll back, if it will let me. It probably won't let me. Is it going to let me? No, I don't think it's going to let me. If I scroll back, and I'll probably lose everything, but if we look at that scenario, it did tell us that there were different development stages and different projects happening all the time. And because it's a fast moving client where you've got lots of different projects, comparing with the previous year doesn't really make sense, because it may not be comparable to what they're doing this year. So again, using that scenario information and understanding, if you've got a client that's constantly having changes and things happening, then comparing to last year might not be relevant. So half a mark was awarded, but not the full mark. So tough. They were all good procedures. It's just trying to make sure that you are getting all of that information in and the correct amount of detail so that you can really do well in these types of questions. Now, we're also here to get some practical advice. So before we do our Q&A, and I'll go through what's been put into the Q&A box, let's have a little look at the things that you should be thinking about to get ready for this exam. First question is, do you practice mock exams? So that poll is open now. I'll literally give you about 20 seconds to put your answer in. So yes or no, do you practice mocks? Okay, give you a few more seconds. 3, 2, 1, nearly everyone. Okay, let's see what your answer was. Yes, well, that's a vast improvement, guys, from a few years ago when I started asking questions like this in webinars. We're seeing a massive improvement in the number of mock exams being attempted. And as we know, that correlates to more exam success. So a whopping 80% of you practice mock exams, which is amazing news. What are the benefits? Well, some of you may be already reaping those rewards, but let's look at the key things. By looking at a mock exam, it's identifying weaker areas to focus on. So if you have a go at a question, you go, wow, that was really hard. I thought I knew that area, but looking at that question, I don't. Then you know you need to target a bit more question practice. It also improves your time management. In my courses, whenever I've done it, I've started revision courses with a progress test, a progress mock, and most people run out of time. always gaps, really struggling. And over the 3-4 weeks in the lead up to the final mock, doing a bit more question practice. And by the time you get to that final mock, you're answering every question, you're able to target the key areas, and you're doing phenomenally better than you did in the progress test. And so as a result of the mock practice and question practice, it's improving your confidence because your time management is getting better. It also means that it increases exam success, which has been proven, as we've seen from those that are attempting the mock exams on the practice platform, those that are using the practice platform, they are much more likely to be successful in the exam. So always make sure, not just for audit and assurance, but for all of your ACCA exams, that you make sure that you plan, prepare, and perform properly in your exam. And so by doing this mock, it's going to help you get ready for that. So things that we need to think about in terms of exam technique for audit and assurance. First of all, planning. In the exam itself, plan your answer. Only fools rush in, okay? You don't dive into questions and start writing absolutely everything that you know. Take a breath. You do actually have time, because if you are more strategic about your answers, you are able to write less and score more as a result. Also, make sure that you prepare properly. Allocate time fairly across the exam. We know, as a kind of a general rule, 1.8 minutes per mark. We also know that by looking at the answers and looking at the way that this exam is structured, section A often feels like you can complete it a lot faster than section B. However, you should take your time reading those questions. So there might be less to read, but actually it's really important that you read it clearly. So don't rush through section A and then save all your time for section B, because most people that do that aren't successful. You need to make sure that you're aiming to at least pass section A to give yourself a good crack at passing the audit and assurance exam. So make sure that you are making sure you allocate time fairly. And then also perform in the exam. Make sure that when you are typing out your answers, that you have some structure. If you've got 5 audit procedures, for example, leave a space between each one. Make sure it's clear to the marker where one test starts and the other one ends. The same with your audit risk questions. If you've identified and copied across an audit risk, you then leave a space and then explain your audit risk. And then on the other side, you have your auditor's response. So by having that nice structure, it's being the marker's friend. It's helping them help you, because then it's much clearer to them where they can award the marks. With 19 days to go, what do we need to do? Well, we need to make sure that you have got a thorough review of your syllabus areas. So do make sure that you are running through. I wouldn't say keep reading, because if anything, we should step away from the reading. But through question practice, if you're picking up areas that you can't remember, go back over them and make sure that you are ready. Timed question practice as well, but don't ignore section A. Make sure you are testing both. Attempt to mock or more. We know that this week was the launch of the pre-December 24 mock exams on the practice platform. So they are now there. And then you also then have the debrief videos coming out end of this week, I think, which means that they'll be available for you after you've had a look at that exam. And then using the practice platform in general as well. So not only is it a great resource because you have all of the past exam questions from recent times, which really then help you prepare for this exam properly, but also it helps you simulate the real exam. So you're getting used to the technology as well. And then reviewing examiners' reports and the articles, like the one that we've been looking at today, is also really important. And another thing to note as well, which might be a strange one for some of you, but look at your MEP report on your My ACCA from the previous exam. So it might be that you did tax last time, or that you did performance management last time. But what does the MEP report tell you? It doesn't tell you necessarily just how well you did technically in your answers, but it also tells you about time management. It tells you about how you reacted to OTQ questions, how you reacted to application questions. And so go back over the most recent one, have a look at it, and look at the feedback that it was telling you about how you respond to styles of questions, how you respond to time management, and have that awareness so that you can think, is there anything that I can do now in the next 19 days to help me improve for this exam? So as I said, definitely worth another little glance over to see if there's anything that was told to you in that report that could help you going forwards. And then the other thing I would always note is, we've got 19 days. It's actually quite a long time. Lots of people can turn around their exam process massively in the time that we've got if they've got some preparation under their belt. So don't then say, right, from now on, I'm getting up at 7 and I'm studying until 7 at night, because you just won't resolve anything. Most of it won't stay in your head and you'll be exhausted by the time you get to exam day. So it's really important to plan out your study sessions and have little bite-sized chunks. So, 1 or 2 hours, have a go at a question, read over the suggested answers, look at a video. There's lots of different resources, read an article, and do a few little bits and pieces in that time, and then go and have a well-deserved break and keep giving yourself rewards and treats, and feed yourself well and sleep well, and make sure that you're resting in between all of these bite-sized study sessions, because you're more likely then to absorb more and it will stay in your head for exam day. Okay, so those were a few little snippets of advice to give. However, now what we need to do is go into this Q&A box, which I'm going to jump into now and see if I can find as many as possible. So there's been a few. Okay, so first one up, it's confusing between substantive procedures and tests of control. Can you explain? Absolutely. They are both things that the auditor does. They are both bits of work that is carried out by the auditor. The test of control is done before they do the substantive audit procedures. So as an auditor, if you're testing controls, you'll be looking at the client's system, and if the client says there's passwords that you need to access this, or there is a system where we have to have authorization before these costs can be approved and sent out and paid for, then what you need to do is test whether that happens. So you're not looking at the financial statements, you're looking at the systems and controls that the client's using and seeing whether they are robust enough, seeing whether they are effective so that they will stop having material misstatements in the financial statements. So if it says that there's a password needed, you would try and gain access to the system without a password. If it says that authorization is needed for a cost, you will inspect to see if there's any evidence of authorization. So that's a test of control. Whereas a substantive audit procedure is audit work that's carried out on the financial statements. So we're looking at the financial statements and the breakdown of transactions behind the financial statements in the ledgers, which is formed to help that, and we're looking for material misstatements. So here we are going to be looking for, recalculating items, comparing them, looking for any evidence that there might be a material misstatement, and then we would bring that up with the client. So there is a very clear difference between the type of work, but it's always confusing because they're both pieces of work that the audit team are going to actually do. But remember, test the control first to make sure that the actual systems are reliable, and then we do the substantive audit procedure to look for material misstatements. So multiple times failing the exam, met many of you many times before, and we've seen lots of success stories and lots of people turning things around. Looking at what the feedback was from your previous exam, so in the last MEP report, is there anything that gives you insight into time management, finishing the exam? Is it that you're spending too long on section B or section A? And maybe sometimes switch it up. I've had it with students where they've changed the route. So for example, if the 30-mark question in section B is really time consuming for you and you get a bit lost in the big scenario, then leave it until the end, but allocate the right amount of time for it. So you don't have to do those questions in order. But definitely it's question practice and being disciplined. And if you can try and get some feedback on your answers, then that would really help. And this article and looking at what's been awarded for marks and what hasn't will be really useful for you. Okay. Okay, do you need to include specifics in relation to the accounting standards, or is it simply saying inventory should be measured at the lower of cost and net realisable value? Absolutely that. So you can mention the fact within the accounting standard. You don't have to state or recite the accounting standard number. We're not testing you on numbers. Remember, think about what ACCA and what the professional body is trying to do here. We're trying to get you to understand how the financial accounts work, how the auditor's rules work as well. But if this was a test where we could just test you on numbers, then you could all rote learn all of the numbers and then score really well. And actually, what we want is to actually bring out a load of accountants that are really well balanced and understand what they're doing rather than being able to recite numbers. So this isn't a memory test. Don't worry if you can't remember an accounting standard number, don't stress, don't mention it. Just mention the rule as long as that's the bit that you have remembered. Okay. If there's 2 or 3 auditors' responses, do we need to state all in order to gain the full marks? Okay. So in the mark scheme, you do often see multiple auditor responses. I tend to say that I would briefly jot down 2 ideas for each one to play safe in my head. However, if you've got a well-described response, which is just based on one piece of work, then you'll still get the mark as well. But often what the mark scheme is giving you and what the model answer is giving you from the markers is some ideas. So just trying to give you a few ideas that you can pick up and maybe use in other exams. Can we write acronyms in the exam? So only recognised ones. So goods dispatch note as a GDN, absolutely fine. NRV, net realisable value, absolutely fine. If you start plucking out ones that only you know, or maybe only the company you work for uses, then if the marker doesn't recognise it, they won't be able to give you the mark. So I would try and only stick to ones that are just generally used in the context of our syllabus. Okay. When it comes to internal control questions, should we avoid using words like understated or overstated, which are prevalent in the risk questions? Not necessarily, no. And I know where you're coming from in that. So if you're looking at direct controls, for example, and you're trying to identify direct controls and then explain the impact that they might have on the financial statements, then it would be absolutely fine to mention that it could lead to something being overstated in the financial statements if it wasn't there. However, don't copy the same approach. So if you end up using that terminology as part of your explanation for direct controls, that's fine, but don't start saying, right, whatever I now have learned, like I'm going to recite for an audit risk question, I'll use for a direct controls question. Avoid that. Definitely don't use the same approach, but the terminology should be absolutely fine. Okay, why was the September 24 exam much more wordy and lengthy compared to past AA exams? Okay, section A is always going to be kind of like a 1-page scenario for each of the 3 scenarios given. Section B, your 30-mark question, is always going to be a big, detailed, chunky scenario. It always has been. And yes, it's incredibly time consuming, but it is something that we need to be prepared for. If you're looking at the other 2, often then you will have a controls question, which isn't quite as bad, and then your substantive audit procedure question, which is normally quite succinct. That's quite a fairly okay one because you can break up bits of it because it will have one chunk on research and development that relates to one bit of the question. So it's a bit easier to manage that part of the scenario. But that 30-mark question is always going to be very time consuming. So using your tools, making sure you are highlighting key bits of text as you're reading through it so that then it jumps out at you when you're trying to look for it when you're answering your question. Copying and pasting direct from the scenario straight into your answer plan, because you can get rid of it afterwards, but if it's relevant, just copy and paste straight in, and then that way you're able to break down that scenario and use it as quickly as you possibly can. Half marks are still given in section B of the AA exam, as we've seen today with both situations. So you will be given half a mark if you are only giving part of the information. And likewise with the audit risk questions and the deficiencies questions and the direct controls questions, you'll get half a mark for identifying from the scenario, and then half a mark for you demonstrating your understanding as to why you included that. So that's definitely there as well. Okay, is there any others that we can look at? Okay, how much time should be spent on section B? Well, personally, I've always said to try and stick to the main content, so 1.8 minutes per mark. What I've always said is if you take your time on section A, you almost certainly will still finish before the time is allocated. So I would do section A first. Take your time, read it clearly. There are going to be some tough questions. I've done many, many sittings now, and every time, nearly every student, even my most brilliant, competent students, come out and go, that section A was really, really hard. And it doesn't matter how many questions we look at in an exam environment, that always feels tough. So take your time, make sure that you have practice lots in the lead up to it for section A anyway, but read them clearly, look at the different options available. Just make sure that you haven't missed some little trick in the wording, because it's always there, and make your answer. If it's looking completely crazy to you and you can't work out what to answer, then flag it and move on. So rather than stare at it for 5 minutes, hoping that there's going to be some miracle arrive, flag it, and then you can come back and guess later if you absolutely have to. Then moving into section B, then you'll hopefully have just a little bit more time extra, but I would then still follow that model, but just try and allocate a little bit more time, even it's like five or so minutes more for the 30 mark question because of that scenario. But what often happens is a lot of students don't leave enough time for substantive audit procedure at the end, and then they're rushing through and just trying to chuck as many ideas as possible. But remember, in the mark scheme, if it's 5 marks for audit procedures, it's only 5 audit procedures they can give you marks for. So you could have 10 very brilliant, brief ones, like inspect the board minutes, recalculate the balance, and we can only give you half a mark for each of them, and therefore we can only do it up to a maximum of 5. So giving yourself enough time for those ones so that you can really do well in those questions is key. Is it mandatory to mention assertions in substantive procedures? No, it's not. Absolutely not. You can do, and if you feel very confident that you know that that particular audit procedure verifies completeness and accuracy or verifies valuation, absolutely fine, put that down. But otherwise, if you're wording it in a different way without stating the assertion, then that's also okay as well. Okay. If we copy and paste directly from the question, isn't there a chance of our paper being nullified? Absolutely not. No, I tell everyone to do it, and everyone does well in the exam. So that's not true. So highlighting key bits of text from the scenario. So if you found an audit risk that's in the scenario, if they tell you that blah limited it's the first year that they're doing the audit, rather than type that out, which will take some time, copy and paste, and then you've identified your audit risk, and that will give you half a mark. So definitely use the copy and paste method for audit risk questions, for deficiencies and controls, direct controls as well, because you're picking information out from the scenario. So that's absolutely fine. No problem at all. Is there any others? The last couple of minutes. Is there IASs supposed to be in there for all audit risks? So audit risk is probably the area where you're going to see quite a few kind of accounting areas come up because of the way the scenario is being designed. So you'll end up with, information talking about research and development, or there might be a new asset that's been bought in the year. There might be something to do with inventory and the way that they're carrying out the inventory controls. So just naturally it will lead into the accounting standards. But if you can't remember the accounting standard number that it relates to, don't worry. Remember, this is an audit exam. We're not testing you on accounting standard numbers. We're testing you on, do you understand that area that they've just mentioned might not be accounted for properly? And if so, what could be wrong? So don't don't focus too much on learning standard numbers. I'd rather you focused on practicing questions and thinking about, okay, if this is a problem, what does it mean for the balance? Does it mean the balance could be too big, or could it be too small, or could it actually be both ways? So that's what we need to make sure that you're practicing and to get those marks in audit risk. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. I think we've got lots of questions answered there. Sorry. All right, Isabel.
No, I was just going to say well done, because we've had so many questions and you've done an amazing job of going through all of those. So thank you so much. I think that's been a really useful session, and I'm sure students will agree, but we do need to bring things to a close now. I just wanted to mention before we go that we do have all of the most important resources in the resource section of this webinar. You've got links, you've got PDFs of the slides, you've got links for the pre-December mock and debrief support, latest examiner reports, read the Mind of the Market article, and links to the Study Hub and our student YouTube channel. Also, remember, anyone who's registered for this webinar will be getting an email in the next 24 hours or so with details of how they can listen to it again. Thank you to everyone who's joined in today, and a really big thank you to Erin for her support and insights today, and also to the rest of the ACCA team who have been supporting us in the back end to deliver this session. We wish you all the best for your exam. So thank you and take care.
Good luck.